Good morning, all of you, and welcome to the second day of faculty development program, Atal Faculty Development Program in Astronomy and Astrophysics. And I am sure that all of you have liked the yesterday's talks and program. And also, I feel that today's program is also equally engaging, and all the topics are very important. So we have with us Dr. Shailaja VS. I will introduce her. Dr. Shailaja VS joined the Jawaharlal Nehru Planetarium as an educator in 1994. She has been involved in preparing a planetarium program. She initiated teaching astronomy at different levels with 5 days and 3 days workshop called Universe in the Classroom. uh, Introduction to the night sky for students, teachers, and laypersons. She initiated the monthly Sky Watch program called Know Your Sky, which is conducted on the first Sunday of every month from the year 2000 onwards. Under the aegis of REAP for BSc students, which was formalized in 2000, she taught basics of astronomy and astrophysics till her retirement in 2017. Many interesting student projects on astronomy were guided by her. Using the images of the moon from Clementine, she determined the age of the lunar basin by crater frequency distribution. A library of stellar spectra has been prepared as an outcome of the visit to the Vanuatu Observatory by REAP students. Several asteroids and comets were observed, and most interesting results was from the spectrum of the eclipsed moon. She was involved in several educational activities as members of textbook committees, board of studies, advisory panels for science centers and museums. She has written more than 300 popular articles and several weekly columns in Prajavani. Her monthly Skywatch column is running since August 1999. Shailaja became the senior scientific officer and then the deputy director, and took charge as the director in 2012. The Sky Theatre was renovated for installation of new hybrid projector from Carl Zeiss. With the enthusiastic support from all colleagues and local talents, the first attempt to produce an in-house planetarium program was successful. She got several new installation in the Science Park, the Parallel Globe, Jantar Mantar replica, anti-gravity cottage, and MS room. Shailaja obtained her MSc in physics from Bangalore University and PhD from Indian Institute of Astrophysics, working on Wolf-Rayet binary stars. Her subject of interest include comets, peculiar stars, and novae. She has more than 120 publications in referred journals and 17 books to her credit. She has keen interest in history of astronomy. She is currently working on stone inscription, translation, and analysis of manuscripts of the 17th century and astronomical aspects of temple monuments and artwork. So I request Dr. Shailaja I welcome her and I request to deliver her talk.
Namaste. Thank you for that nice introduction. I'll be speaking on comets. This is a topic of my interest basically because I was involved in the observations of the comet Halley. Just then I had finished my PhD thesis, so I was included in that group. So for about 8 months, we were observing the comet Halley. And before the comet Halley arrived, we tried it on several other comets because those days some special filters were being supplied exclusively for the observation of comet Halley. And so I was looking at all these periodic comets like Encke, Churyumov, Gerasimenko, and Geocopernicus. All these periodic comets I had an opportunity to observe from the 1 meter telescope in Kavlur. And subsequently, Halley, of course, we did a lot of observations, and for the first time we did the spectroscopy along the tail of the comet. So that was something new. But nowadays, those techniques are all very easy with digital equipments. In those days, we did not have digital equipments. It was it was a revolution that we were able to get a printout of the numbers, that was the number of photons. So that was a great achievement those days. And subsequently also I observed a few comets, and the bright comets like Hyakutake and Hale-Bopp we had. I had taken the students to Kavalu to observe. But otherwise, Hale-Bopp was one comet for which we were able to do some public outreach activities also. Many people came and saw the comet. It was visible to the naked eye, but those people who had seen Ikea Seki, which was 30 degrees up in the sky, compared to that, Hale-Bopp was not all that bright. It was bright from astronomical standards, but not for the layperson. So I clearly remember some elderly people coming and saying that, "Do you call this a comet?" No, 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 it is not a comet at all. So these kinds of comments I had heard those days. But for this generation, unfortunately, you did not have an opportunity to see such bright comets with naked eye yet. But your time is not over. Any day, maybe tomorrow, somebody may discover a comet, and you will see that it is fairly long and will fill the sky and will help you appreciate the wonder of the nature. Okay, now I want to talk about the physics of the comet. So I'll share my screen. Now are you able to see the PowerPoint?
Yeah, it is there, but it is there as a total. You can now show. You can put in show.
Okay, so are you able to see the screen now?
Yeah, perfect. It is okay.
Perfect. Okay. So I first said I will talk about the physics of the comets. But then I found that I have to tell something about chemistry also, because the study of the comets opened up a new branch of astrophysics called astrochemistry. In the course of the lecture, you will understand why I mentioned this. Because chemistry, a lot of chemistry you will have to understand for doing this, and subsequently, of course, biology also. And therefore, I will start with my first slide. So there are many historical records of the comets. So, for example, such paintings are available from the European records. People were simply thrilled to look at the comet, which was so bright. There are two reasons why we don't get this kind of objects now. If perhaps I'll give you the answer, one answer at the last, as the last slide. But right now, the light pollution is one thing which is preventing you from enjoying the beauty of the comets. So even if there are comets, and an average about 25 comets come every year, but you hardly get to see them because a similar situation maybe 300 years ago, 400 years ago, a layperson would have enjoyed, but unfortunately now because of light pollution. And the second reason is that people have lost touch with the sky. It's very rare that people look up and see something happening in the sky. Some people cannot even recognize planets. So that is the state of affairs now, because it is never taught to you in your curriculum at any part. And you are never asked to even make note of the position of the sun, the cause of winter, summer, and all those things. So where is the place for comet for you to enjoy? This is another interesting comet which will pave way for the history. You notice that. Can you see the pointer? Yeah. So here, this comet here. Now this is a story of the birth of Jesus Christ. But then the artist, he was so impressed. Giotto is his name. He was so impressed by the sight of the comet that he saw. So he incorporated that in this painting. So this turned out to be a boon for Halley later on, because this was one of the previous appearances of Halley's comet. We have other records in history also concerning the comets. So people believed that these are things that are happening in our own atmosphere. This was one thinking. And the other is that they are responsible for disasters. So this was in the year 1538. And you see there are two comets in the sky. and the whole of Europe was burdened with drought and all kinds of calamities. And so that is depicted here, and the comets, the two comets have been held responsible for that. And this is another Emperor Nero, who was known for all kinds of bad things. But then one is that when he took charge, when he was coronated, he was a comet appeared, and therefore someone told him that this is a bad omen, you may lose your throne anytime. So he made a list of people who are the potential seekers of the throne and got them all executed. And many intelligent people in his country ran away because they were afraid that they may kill them also. That, and subsequently 4 years later another comet came. But then people were silent. Nobody talked about any calamity or any losing the throne, because if they say that, they themselves may get executed. So that was the fear. So this is the kind of history also that the comets provide. Well, the first person to study the comet in a systematic way, there were many, but I am mentioning Tycho Brahe. He was the first one to show that they do not belong to the Earth's atmosphere. As I mentioned earlier, they thought that they are like clouds. The clouds, the thunder, lightning, and so on. So they believed that it is that. So he showed that. Well, how did he show that they do not belong to the Earth's atmosphere? So can you think of some idea where you can show that something is not belonging to the Earth's atmosphere? If somebody has an answer, they can answer. Okay, I don't hear anything. So, well, let us say that, let's start with an aeroplane. It's flying above me, and then the person who is some 7 kilometers away from me will see it not at his zenith, but slightly away. All right. Then let us consider an object which is still higher. Let us say a cloud, a lightning. So the lightning can be occurring some 15 kilometers away. I also see, and the other person also will see, but the directions will be different. So this is how you get to know that they are belonging to the Earth's atmosphere. We can go another step further. I do not know how many of you have seen the artificial satellites in the night sky. So evening, if you just look at the sky, nowadays the sky is very clear. Invariably, you will see some moving dots. They are all the satellites, artificial satellites. So if you see a satellite over your head, at the same time, another person who is some 100 kilometers away will also be seeing the same satellite, but in a different direction. So this is the principle that Tycho Brahe also used. What he did was, he you need some reference when you are monitoring the comet. Therefore, he observed the position of the comet relative to a star, and he compared. There was another person who was also making note of this from the city of Prague. Tycho Brahe lived in an island. A special observatory was built for him by the king, and so he was not living in the main city of Prague. So somebody else was making note of it. So he compared the two and found that at the same instant, both of them were looking at the comet, and relative to the star, the change in the position was not much. Now you will not see it even for the moon. Okay, so for example, if I see Venus next to the moon, almost touching the moon today, a person in Delhi also will see it. But if you measure carefully, you will notice that there will be a small angular separation. For him, for me, it may be just touching the moon. For him, the difference will be about half a degree, or maybe 1/4 of a degree, or even less than that. So that tells you that we are at different geographical locations, because we definitely know that Venus is far away and so is the moon. And this will also give us an idea of what is the relative distances between the moon and Venus. Exactly a similar thing Tycho Brahe did, and found that the comet must be at least at a distance 6 times that of the moon. So this was a major rethinking, scientific thinking on the comets, I should say. And so he said they stay far beyond the moon. And he also noticed that they move. They do move, compared to yesterday and today, there is a shift in their position. So it was moving. And it's here that I needed the meaning of coordinates. So later today you will learn about the coordinates. The coordinates are some fixed. You all understand what are coordinates. You have heard studied about the Cartesian coordinate system. So you fix the position of any point, say on the board, as x and y. You need x and y. If it is in a room like this, then you need a z also. X, y, z. These are the three coordinates which fix the position of any point in this room or on this wall. Similarly, on the sky also, you need to have some reference points. And fortunately, we have so many stars there, and we know the positions of the stars. We have measured the positions of the stars, catalogs are available. Relative to the star, how far is the comet? That you can measure as a coordinate system. So this was done, this is routinely done by all astronomers for fixing the positions of the planets, and it was done for the comet also. And while after measuring that, you are standing on the earth and seeing it, but you have to transfer it into a different domain as though you are outside the earth and watching the solar system from somewhere outside. That exercise is called the transformation of coordinates, and that was also done by Tycho Brahe very effectively. It was a routine thing those days, so they were doing it. All the astronomers in all the countries were doing this job. And so he he has put the earth at the center. Those days, people believed that the earth is at the center. So he marked the positions of the comet here, and this is the sun. Relative to the sun is going around the earth, and relative to that, where is the comet and how is the tail? He marked it. So this was a first step in understanding the movement of the comet. So the credit goes to him. And see, looking at this figure, he declared that it is moving along straight line. Not only he, even Isaac Newton believed. Isaac Newton came almost 70 years after Tycho Brahe, but even at his time, he believed that the comets move along straight lines. Why that happens, I'll just now explain to you. Okay, now before that, I want to tell about the discovery and how the names are given. When you look up the catalog of comets, the most frequent name that you see will be that of Messier. Messier is known for yet another thing also. Okay, in the 18th century and 19th century, if people discovered comet, they would be given some prize, a huge sum of money, something like $50, $100, or something like that. And therefore, there were many people who built their own telescopes, and their only job in the night was to search for a comet. So the person who discovers it first will get the money. And Charles Messier was one of them, and he did not do it with the idea of making money. But then I'll tell you about Halley just now. Halley had predicted that a comet is going to appear, and he wanted to be the first one to trace it. If that is so, where is that comet? So he started searching the entire sky, and another deviation developed here. That is, when you are looking in the sky, how does the comet look? The stars will look like dots, but the comet will not look like a dot. The word comet means something like the hair. It has a hairy kind of a structure. So it will not be a point object, but it will have some kind of a nebulous or cotton piece of cotton like structure around it. Why that we will learn later. So he was looking for such objects. And now you know that there are interesting objects called nebulae and galaxies. If you had an opportunity to see them through the telescope, you will realize that they will just look like a piece of cotton there amidst dots of stars. So they were all called as nebula. And this person, Messier, he first prepared a catalogue of all such objects because they were misleading him. He would mistake them for a comet, and then he will say, "Oh my God, it is not changing the position; it is in the same position, and therefore let me mark this." So he started like this, and so he made a list of about 100 objects in the sky, which are looking not like point objects but like a piece of cotton. So they were all called nebulae, and the catalog is called Messier catalog. So when you say M1, M1 means the first object in the catalog of Messier, and that is the Crab Nebula. Now you would have seen fantastic pictures from the Hubble Space Telescope of the Crab Nebula, but you should see that through the telescope, then you will realize what kind of difficulty Charles Messier had. Okay, that apart, he discovered many comets, maybe about 20 or something. And the very first comet that he discovered was not recognized as a comet, and he was disappointed, but he didn't give up. So he discovered many comets. And the person who made money was Bernard. There are many comets named as Bernard because those days the name of the discoverer would get attached to the comet. So Bernard was a poor fellow, and he learned how to make a telescope. So he worked with a photographer, and then subsequently he made his own telescope and he started discovering comets one by one. He became very rich. So he made money out of this. So I am showing you only the European names. There are many Americans also, many other people also, but the only Indian name is that of Venu Bapu. You know him as the founder of the Indian Institute of Astrophysics, and you can say he was the one who established observational astronomy in independent India because he returned from America in 51 or 52, and the first task he did was to improvise or renovate all the observatories that were sort of very old fashioned. So he established the new telescope in the Nainital Observatory, then subsequently in Kodaikanal, and then Kavalur. Kavalur, he started the 2.3 meter project also, but he didn't live to see it. So he was the only one who has a comet named after him. And now you hear names like Shoemaker, Levy, these are the names very often heard. And now last month you had Leonard, all those are the names of the people. Then you will hear Eisen, Neowise, last year we had Neowise, Linear. These names are not Linear, Eisen are not names of individuals. There are so many survey instruments that are carrying out a routine survey of the sky. So even if there is a small object that is moving, immediately it tracks it and alerts all the ground-based observatories so that they also track it. So they will come to know whether it is an asteroid or a comet or just some piece of junk that is there in the sky. So all those things will be informed by these. So nowadays these have taken over. So they have been detecting so many comets, and so you hear these names. As I mentioned in the earlier days, the name of the discoverer was getting attached to the comet. So there are several discoveries from India which went unnoticed. We are yet to find a few more. One published by Professor Kapoor is in this journal. It was discovered in 1831 by John Taylor from the Madras Observatory. But by the time he sent the message, somebody else had got the credit already. Okay, the communication was very poor. Messages had to go by ship, you see. The other person who discovered a comet but lost credit is, you might not have heard his name, he is Subramanya Iyer, and he worked in Thiruvananthapuram. He was the director of this observatory from 1937 to 42 or 43. This observatory is still there in Thiruvananthapuram, so if you get an opportunity to go there, it's well within the reach. It's in the heart of the city, so you can visit this old thing which was set up by the famous king Swati Tirunal, who is known for his contribution to music, classical music. The same king was very much interested in astronomy, and he established this observatory, which became after 100 years, 1837. That is when he established it. 100 years later, it became part of the university, or I think the university itself was started around that. And then the observatory flourished so in between, whenever there were many of course, British directors who took over and made some observations. Subramanya Iyer report, he did see the comet, and he and his assistant called Kuttan Nair, these two made some interesting uh, calculations. They calculated the orbit of the comet. They reported it to the Royal Society, but then it was already reported from elsewhere, so they lost the credit. I think you should watch this YouTube, which is on the history of this observatory, which tells about all these things. This is made by Dr. Anand Narayan from Thiruvananthapuram IIST. It's a beautiful documentary on this observatory. And I studied about, I was not aware of this YouTube, but I studied the comet discovery, and we published a paper almost at the same time when this paper was published. Look at the name of the comet, Decock Paras K. Volos, such a big name, because two people discovered it, and the credit has been shared. So, but in the process, Subramanya Iyer lost his discovery credit. Okay, that so such things used to happen. It was common those days. And in this series of papers, many interesting discoveries from other parts of the world, like Australia, New Zealand, and even South America, those things have been reported here. So that is about the discovery and the names that get associated with this. But now, instead of giving you the long list of table of things, I am giving you 3 examples of the comets. So the first comet is Comet Leonard, which was here last month. I don't know how many of you got an opportunity to see it. It was visible in the first week of January from South India very clearly. Look at the name. It is given the name as C. That means it's a very, very long period comet. And 2021, it was discovered in the year 2021. A stands for between January 1st and January 15th. That fortnight is given the name A. And 1, that was the first comet to be discovered in that fortnight. So the number is conveyed this way. Now, Comet Halley came so many times, but it's so established, so the record says that it is called as 1P. This is the first entry in the list of periodic comets. P stands for periodic comets. And the name Halley is given. And 1682. 1682 is the official record of the discovery of the comet that year. Q1. I mentioned A first fortnight is for January, B will be second fortnight, C, D, etc. So Q will come to something like October or September. That was the comet to be discovered in the first 15 days of that interval. They have used all the alphabets A to Z except I. I you can confuse, so except I, all the others have been used up. Now, Comet Shoemaker-Levy. This was another famous comet. I do not know how many of you remember this. This was discovered in 1993. F corresponds to May or June. Second comet. The interesting thing was that this was looking not like a comet with a conventional tail, but it was looking like a cigar. with a hockey stick kind of an appearance. So people did not understand what was this. Shoemaker, husband and wife, Eugen and Caroline, and David Levy. These were the three people who discovered this. They took many, many photographs and found that it is not one comet, but it is a chain of comets. That was the interesting part. And then subsequently, they found that this comet had broken into pieces. They also calculated the orbit and found that it was coming from somewhere towards the sun and got entangled with Jupiter and started going around Jupiter. When it started going around Jupiter, within one orbit, it broke into pieces. They identified 21 pieces which were named as A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, etc. And ultimately, they predict that it is going to crash on Jupiter, which did happen next year, that is 1994. So why the word D? D is defunct. It's not there anymore. That is the meaning. Okay, now here I have also included this is the orbit of comet Halley. See, it is coming from beyond Neptune. This point you please remember, we need this. So this is called the aphelion, this is called the perihelion, and this is, its aphelion is near beyond Neptune. And also observe the speed. It moves very slowly here and it moves quite fastest when it is in the perihelion. So this goes in tune with Kepler's laws, if you know what is Kepler's laws. This is the other comet, Leonard, and this is, see, we do not know from where it is coming. So it is coming like this and going this way. Observe the directions. So this is in this direction, this is in this direction with the same perspective of the solar system. That means this is direct, this is retrograde. The two motions are in two opposite sense. So this is another word which I am going to use subsequently. So please remember, the comets can move this way or this way. So both ways it is possible. Then we have to tie this up with some mathematics. So Kepler was the first one to deduce the three laws of planetary motions, which are equally well applicable to the comets also. And he showed that they are moving ellipses. All the planets move around the sun in ellipses. So what is the difference between a circle and an ellipse? Now you know with the mathematics background you have already. So circle is, they are called conic sections, so you get the different ones. And what defines them is this quantity called the eccentricity, which is 0 for a circle, which is between 0 and 1 for an ellipse, and it is 1 for a parabola, and it is more than 1 for a hyperbola. So you know this from your mathematics sessions. So the orbits can be any of these. The orbit of a comet can be any of these. So it's we have not even seen even one example of a circle, but ellipses. Just now I showed you comet Halley, it is an ellipse. The second law of Kepler says that the position of the sun is not at the center of the ellipse, but at one of the foci. So this is another thing that you will have to remember. Because of that, at one point it is very close to the sun, at another point it is the farthest. These points are called the perihelion and the aphelion. So I think you know this already from your mathematics sessions, otherwise I have just summarized it here without giving you long equations. So this is the work of Isaac Newton, who tried to understand the orbit. So he plotted the position of the comet. One had to observe the comet, measure the position, convert it into a thing which can be put on the paper. So he realized that it is something like a parabola, but he was not able to understand how something can be this. So he, see, in this part, if you are observing only here, it looks almost like a straight line. This happens. Even now it happens, because when they, for example, Leonard, when it was discovered, within a day they predicted the orbit. they had only 3 points. So if you take only 3 points here, you will conclude that it is a straight line. But now we know that it is not a straight line. So you have to fit a curve to this. It can be an ellipse, it can be a parabola. So if you want to have it more precise, you need more number of points. And therefore, when the International Astronomical Union auxiliary unit called the Minor Planet and Comet Division, when they publish the thing, they say this many number of observation points we have used. So now there is a team working on that. There's a computer available, but Isaac Newton did that all single-handedly. So he was debating whether it was a straight line or a parabola. So this kind of a debate was there. And then came Edmund Halley. Edmund Halley was a good friend of Isaac Newton. So he participated in this debate on the possible path of the comet. That was one great achievement because so many people sat together and tried to identify what is this orbit, because till then, now we know everything, but they did not know. They saw that something is moving beyond the orbit of moon, somewhere far away, and it appears to be going in a straight line. So what is this? This was the debate, and another interesting thing was that the Kepler's laws were already established. See, Kepler lived at least some 50 years before this, so the laws were already established. So the fact that there are elliptical orbits, there can be parabolic orbits, etc., that was already moving around. Those ideas were already there. And it was Tycho Brahe who had suggested on a parabolic path. And Tycho Brahe was much earlier than Kepler. So all these ideas were there already when the debate was going on. So Halley put together all the ideas and then he started sketching the path of the comet in the sky. So he started collecting observations of all comets, and then he started getting the orbits. That is when he found that there is a similarity in the path of the comets that appeared in 1531, 1607 and 1682. Well, he made a couple of trials, and once he had predicted that he had combined two more comets and arrived at a different number. But then he repeated the calculations again and again. That's when he used that famous painting I showed you earlier of one of the previous record. That was the 1531 record, and he declared, "Hence I dare venture to foretell that it will return again in the year 1758." Now you see, observing the comet in 1758 was so important because that would prove that Halley was right. But he died in 1742, so he didn't live to see this, and that is the thing that made Charles Messier start looking around for comets right from the year 1753 itself. He started searching for the comets because some comets were so bright they would be seen for almost 8 to 9 months. So he started searching for the comet, and that's how he prepared the catalog and all those things. So this is the interesting work of Edmund Halley as far as the comet is concerned. But Halley was a genius. He had done many other interesting things also. For example, he had constructed a diving bell, which all the scientific community uses now. And people were scared of using it, but he himself sat in that and went into the ocean and moved around and came back, and he established that this diving bell is a very interesting instrument for the study of what is beneath the ocean. And he also made a list of small variations in the positions of stars. He went to an island called Helena and made observations of many stars. He was a magnetic field measurements, so many things he did. He was a genius. But now we are only talking about his contribution to the comet. So no wonder when the comet appeared in 1758, it was called Halley's Comet. Now you know that he did not discover the comet, but He was the first one to predict the path, and therefore it is named after him. All the other cases, it's the discoverer. There is one more exception. I will mention that. That is NK. I will mention that when we look at that. So this is the orbit of the comet Halley. As you can see, right now it is somewhere here. It's near the aphelion point, and this is the path it takes. It is inclined. It is inclined. I don't know. These kinds of two-dimensional pictures will not give you an idea of the inclination. So how do I do that? All of you can see me, I think, isn't it? Although I'm sharing the screen. Are you seeing me? Because I want to show this. This is the
Yes,
ellipse. This is the ellipse, let's say. This is the ellipse. This is the path of the comet. So the comet can be, the path can be like this, wherein you will not see this is the sun. So the sun and you form the plane of the ecliptic, and so you will notice that it can be like this, 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 it can be like this. So anyway, so this is a very interesting thing. Therefore, if you want to appreciate the orbit of the comet, if you want to fully understand that, you should know one thing, that is the perihelion distance. You should know that is easy to measure, because you will see the comet only when it comes to the perihelion. When it is in aphelion, you won't see it, it's very faint. And you also should know what is this angle. This is called the angle of inclination. And let us say I consider this corner as the reference point. With reference to this direction, whether the aphelion is here or here or here, that I should know. That is another angle I should know. So there are several parameters that you should know for fully establishing the orbit of the comet. So here it is. So now you see here, the paper that I showed you is something like this. So you have perihelion, you have aphelion, and this is the plane of the ecliptic, which I showed you as this plane. When I held it like this is the plane. The earth and the sun, that plane is the ecliptic plane. So the orbit will definitely intersect the plane of the ecliptic at 2 points. This is true for the moon, this is true for Venus, this is true for any planet, any comet. So it will intersect this plane like this. It will intersect. If this is the plane of the ecliptic, this will be the plane of the comet's orbit. So the point where it intersects, there can be 2 points. One is called the ascending node, the other is called the descending node. You know that this is true for the moon also. In the case of the moon, if instead of the comet, if this were the moon, we call this as Rahu and this as Ketu. No, you know the story, and therefore you will immediately understand what I am telling. And this angle is called the angle of inclination. That is this angle. Now, instead of marking here, they have marked it here. It doesn't matter. This is perpendicular to this. This is perpendicular to this plane. So this angle is same as this angle. And these are the different angles I mentioned. How far is that from? See, this is the reference direction. With reference to the direction, reference direction, this is called the first point of Aries. Where is the node and where is the perihelion point? So these are the things. And from mathematics, you know that if A is the semi-major axis, A into 1 minus E. E is the eccentricity. So this is the perihelion distance. And you have the aphelion distance as A into 1 plus E. All this you would have known from the mathematics sessions. So now we can classify the comets. So the simplest way is to base it on the period. So short period comets. So comet Halley is a short period comet. It's 76 periods. Then what is long period then? Long period can be 100 years, 1000 years, anything. So long period comets are there. Then there is another classification called sun grazers. They go very close to the sun. In most of the cases, these sun grazers will not come back. They go so close that the whole thing gets evaporated and they die there. And now we have a new class called interstellar comets. So you may recall this picture. This has a funny name. This is Oumuamua. This object was discovered a couple of years ago, and they found that this is not an object of the solar system. So it is coming from somewhere outside. So interstellar comet. We have two objects in this category now, and now they are hoping that we will get more, because now we have tools to identify that they are not belonging to the solar system but elsewhere. So how do we do all this? So we have to know the physics. So the comet has a tail. All along I had been talking about one tail, but it has two tails. One is the gas tail and the other is a dust tail. From the naked eye you may not be able to make out, but if you take a long exposure photograph, you can make out the two tails. So here it is. The dust tail is sort of curved, whereas the gas tail is almost a straight line, exactly in the direction opposite to that of the sun. Okay. So here it is. So as the comet moves like this, at different positions, you can see that the orientation of the tail will be different. And one thing is that this dust tail here, as you can see here, it is trying to follow the orbit. Whereas the other blue tail here, which is the gas tail or the ion tail, is always directed away from the sun. See, almost a straight line. From the sun, it is almost a straight line. So this is something they observe, and then now you have to, once you observe, you will have to start wondering why it is so, and that is how the theories get formulated. So now we have the explanation. When it is far away, there is no tail at the aphelion point. When it approaches the distance of about 5 astronomical units, 5 astronomical units is roughly the orbit of Jupiter. When it reaches that distance, slowly the material starts evaporating and it forms a coma. Coma is a fuzzy patch around the central body. And as it approaches a distance of, say, Mars, by then itself the material will get pushed and the tail is formed. And depending on the type of the comet, etc., the size, all those things, it will have two tails. This is the dust tail, which is curved, which is trying to move along the orbit, and the other ion tail is always directed away from the. So we know the reason now. The large particles, the material evaporates. I will show you all those things. So, and when it returns between about 3 and 5 astronomical units, the tail disappears and it goes back as a piece of rock back to the place where it started, or the aphelion point. But then I have to mention this also to you. About 35 years ago, there was a discussion on what is called the anti-tail. So this is one comet. This is the normal tail, but it showed a tail in this direction also. So this was a big puzzle as to how a thing can have an anti-tail. But then it was successfully explained by the geometry of the situation. Now let us say the sun is here, the earth is here, this is the head of the comet. Now the ion tail is like this, always directed away from the sun. And the comet is moving like this, and therefore the dust tail is curved towards the orbit, towards this. It doesn't move this way, but it is curved this way. Now let us say the earth is here, you are watching the comet. You will see the head, you will see this tail definitely, and you will also see this tail. But then this part of the tail also is in your line of sight. So you will see it here. You can't make out that it is so far away, but you will see that this part of the tail is appearing here. That is how.
We cannot see the picture that you are drawing.
I'm not drawing any picture.
But we can't see. You said this. So, okay, it is on the screen that you are talking about. Is that right?
Yeah, I have a pointer here.
Okay, okay.
Can you
Thank
see
you
the
so much.
pointer? Can you see the pointer here?
Okay, okay,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
The
Yeah,
pointer is near the earth now.
yeah.
The pointer is near the earth now, and so it is here. Okay, so this is it is.
Good.
Okay. So that is how you see the antitail. Okay. And then there is a third tail. If you take photographs, if you study the photographs which are long exposure photographs, you will definitely see a third tail. That is this. You can see this picture, this different color here. And in Hale-Bopp, they were able to distinctly identify what are these features. So these were OH ions, and this is sodium, and this is the irregular dust tail. So similarly here, this is the hydrogen plasma, and this is the sodium tail. This is Neowise, which came 2 years ago. So they were able to see the three different types of tails. Now, in physics, you would have studied about the determination of E by M, charge to mass ratio. So what they do is they apply magnetic field so that the ions of different species will be bending into different directions. And this is a standard experiment that is done in all physics labs. And by measuring that angle, you will relate it to the ion. And so you can estimate the abundance of the ion. You can estimate the E by M ratio. So now here the nature is doing it in all glory, without any magnetic field or any such application. The ions are getting separated on their own by virtue of their differences of the material, the masses, and so on. So all that is happening in nature. So this is a natural E by M ratio experiment, you can say. There was another comet in 2013 called Catalina. See here the three ratios. This is the ion tail, which is so straight, and this fan shape. This is the fan shape, which is the dust tail. They were able to interpret this in terms of the size of the particle. If the particle of the comet is very small, then it will have a different deviation. So what are the particles that are present? How much of particles are present? Dust and gas and all those things. Not ions, neutral ones. So that they were able to measure this. This is something unusual. So I showed this. Now when I talk about the structure of the comets, I will tell you what these dust and particles are. So it was Kepler who first mentioned that the tail is perhaps because there is some kind of a flow from the sun which is pushing this material away. He was the first one to identify that phenomena, that there is something happening to the comet because of the sun. And it was supported by Newton also subsequently. And later on, about 100 years, 150 years ago, they were able to relate the two so tightly that now you have, this is a computer simulation of the tail of a comet. So as these are the particle flow flux from the sun, and how it modulates the flow of material ejected from the comet. So this is the comets were responsible for the discovery of solar wind, that you can see. And then there was a puzzle between in the orbits of two comets, Halley and Encke. Encke is a comet, shortest period comet, which comes once in 3 years. And there is a nice story about it. I had told you that people were getting prizes for the comet. So NK gave prizes to so many people because it kept coming once in 3 years. So many people. Then NK was not the one who discovered the comet. He started measuring the orbital parameters and found that it must be the same comet which is coming again and again and again. And so he declared that this is the shortest period comet. And because he did all the calculations pertaining to that, it was called as NK's comet. Okay, so I don't know how many people felt very unhappy because they were deprived of the prize that they were eligible for. Yes. Yes. Please tell. Is there any question? Is there any question?
No. No, I think you can continue.
Okay, So now I was telling about the difference between the comet Halley and NK. One is obviously the period, 76 years and 3 years. Now, once NK told that it is only 3 years, it became an object of great interest because they were able to predict its perihelion passage. And the perihelion passage occurs between the sun and the earth. So, it was easy to observe it also. And they tried to, and because it has come so often, it doesn't have a spectacular tail. It just looks like a dot. So, they were calculating the perihelion point, and however accuracy they are trying to, whatever be the accuracy they are trying to incorporate or achieve, always it was getting delayed by 2 hours. It always was delayed by 2 hours. So they were unable to explain this. It was the opposite in case of Comet Halley. It came earlier by a few hours. So why is that there is a difference? So this was explained by this famous thing called Yarkovsky drift, which is used. This is the orbit of an asteroid, but it is equally well applicable for the comet also. So when material is ejected from the surface of this body, then it can slow it down, and that is decided by the spin. If it is spinning this way, it can slow it down. If it is spinning in the opposite way, it can be hastened. Therefore, this drift was observed in case of Halley and NK. I showed you earlier that the orbit of Halley is in one direction, linear was in another direction. So depending on that, they were able to now comment on the spin of the comet. It is probable that NK is spinning in one direction, Halley is spinning in another direction, and this heat coming off when it comes closer to the sun is responsible for the delay. So this was a very useful suggestion, and it was incorporated. And now when the perihelion timings are calculated, this effect is taken into consideration. I told you that the material is coming off from the surface. So what effect it can have? That reminds you something. The escape velocity. All of you know what is escape velocity, and here is the beautiful formula which you all must have learnt in your 10th standard. So the escape velocity of the Earth is 11.2 kilometers per second. This has been repeated so often in INSAT and other launches, so you may have it memorized already. So the escape velocity for Earth is 11.2 kilometers per second. It is proportional to the mass and the radius. Therefore, what can be the mass? What can be the escape velocity on the comet? So that takes you to the question, how do you get the mass of the comet? That is the part. So things are escaping from the surface of the comet, let's say. They are escaping, and therefore, will they escape from the comet once for all? If so, how can you know that? And what can you conclude on the temperature or the mass of the comet? So this is the physics part which we'll deal with later again. Now I'll tell something about spectroscopy. We'll come back to the escape velocity after we know the structure of the comet. So this is an experiment which you would have done in your chemistry lab called the flame test. So you put different salts into the Bunsen burner flame and enjoy the color. I'm sure you would all have enjoyed this green, red, pink, yellow colors coming in the flame. So basically, this is defining the structure of the atom. So you are going to the atomic level and the atomic transitions to understand this difference in the color. And so you can very well define by this kind of an experiment what is the atomic structure and what are the transitions that are responsible for these differences in colors. The color is related to the energy and the energy to the wavelength. So if you were to observe this through a spectroscope, let's say. So if you do that, see lithium is here, this is lithium, shows red lines in the spectrum. And sodium shows yellow lines. And here you have potassium is here. You have many blue lines plus yellow line. And there are many other strontium and other things which are very blue in color. So the flame test which you do in chemistry now has a different kind of an application. That means you study the spectrum, you can precisely determine. So can we use this for the comet? After all, comet, how does it shine? It shines by reflected sunlight just as all the planets do. And this is the solar spectrum. All of you know what is solar spectrum, the 7 colors of the rainbow. But those of you who have studied some physics also know that there are these dark lines superposed on the color, and that is called the Fraunhofer lines. And so when you see it through a spectrograph, you will see these lines, but if you see it through a prism, you will see only the 7 colors. Therefore, if you take a spectrum of the comet, you expect to see only this because this is the reflected light. So is that so? So this is the typical spectrum of a comet. Now you see here the 7 colors of the rainbow, all they are there. But then you have some strong lines here. Lines, not dark, but they're strong lines. So if you convert this into a graph, this is the graph, and you can identify these lines with the different chemical composition. So here is cyanogen. Cyanogen is very strong here. Even with a low resolution spectrum, this CN will come up. These are the carbon. C3 and C2 are molecules of carbon. CH is here. You have NH2, which is ammonia, and somewhere here beyond this, you will see some water lines also. Water means OH. So based on this, a model for the comet has been made. This is called the dirty snowball model, and the central rock, which is the comet itself, is loosely packed with these ingredients. And what is the packing material? The packing material is ice, which is frozen, and that is holding all these things together. So what are the ingredients here? You can see CO, CO2, H2O, NH3, CH3OH, CH2OH, HCN, and many more. And what are these particles? Diamond, graphite, silicon carbide, titanium carbide, silicon nitride, corundum, spinel, all these things, silicate minerals, all these things are held, and there are these interplanetary dust particles. All these things are held together by this kind of a cement. So when the comet comes closer to the sun, as the ice evaporates, these particles which are held together by this, they also start leaking into the space. That is how you get the dust tail and the ion tail, because these will get ionized by the solar influx. Now, what are the abundances of organic compounds? Here, water. Water is the most abundant thing. So here you have H2O. If you take that as 100, What are the other ingredients? Now, this I have taken from a German paper. So, this comma you have to read as a point. This is 0.5, this is 0.9, this is 1.2, and so on. So, next to water, you have methane, and you have hydrogen cyanide, you have carbon monoxide, and you have so many other organic compounds. So, you have so many organic compounds that are present here. In fact, the discovery of CN, you see, I showed you in this spectrum, CN is very strong. This is very strong. So the fact that cyanogen is present in the comet was known almost 100 years ago. Therefore, when comet Halley appeared in the year 1910, they were thinking that it will rain cyanogen into our skies. And in that year, the Earth passed through the tail of the comet. So they were selling all kinds of things. So this is one cartoon of that 1910. So this is in German. It reads like this. So this lady is trying to protect herself from the comet because it is going to rain cyanogen. And he is telling, no, you don't need to open the umbrella. You just close the umbrella. So seeing you, the comet will go away. He is teasing her. Okay, so that is the type of cartoon. And then people made comet tablets and comet helmets. And so they made a lot of money. It is a source of water. And water, from your chemistry, you know that there are two types of water, but not heavy water. Now, can you see the difference between these two? Both are H2O. They look identical. But for the spin here, this is the spin. This is in one direction, parallel. This is ortho. If they are anti-parallel, it is para. What is interesting is that from the lab experiments, we know that the ratio of the ortho to para. If you take water, the water will contain both species. So you have some spectroscopic tools to find the ratio of the ortho to para, and that is a function of temperature. So this is from a lab experiment. Now you see here, if the temperature is around 30 Kelvin, all of you know, I think, what is Kelvin. 0 is minus 273. So 30 Kelvin is quite low. At that temperature, the ratio is 2 to 3. And here on the Earth, we have 300 K. Our room temperature is about 300 K. The ratio is 3. So the ortho to para ratio is 3. We have this species more compared to this. In the case of the comets, it ranges from 2 to 3. That means because you have done this experiment in the lab, you can relate it directly and estimate the temperature of the comet. So you know the temperature of the comet now. Comet is not a very, very hot body. It's a very cool body. It's just 20 or 30 K, very low. And so you have an idea of the temperature of the comet now. Now I will go back to, okay, now I will tell about this orbital specialities. I had told you so many times, I drew your attention to the aphelion. So where are all they coming from? So they all must have been resting at some place which is the aphelion point. And then they found that the aphelion points are for the short periods just beyond the orbit of Neptune. This is called the Kuiper belt. And the other ones have still farther, which is almost halfway to the nearest star. And I told you that the orbits of the comets can be in all directions, all these directions. Whereas the short period comets were restricted to the plane, the long period ones had all kinds of inclinations. So based on that, Oort hypothesized that it is a cloud. All the comets are stored like a cloud. Whereas the Kuiper belt ones have somehow come here and then they got redistributed, and so they have settled down to the plane of the ecliptic. So this is what, these are the two storehouses that were discovered, that were hypothesized based on the orbital speciality. The chemistry has something to do with this. That's why I have put this here. So the ortho to para water ratio is different for these two types of comets. Okay, now how did we know all these things? So, space missions, I have to tell about Halley. Um, Halley turned out to be the first comet for determining the orbit, also for this space missions, because we definitely knew that in 1986 it was expected, and it did come. And so there were 4 space missions to Comet Halley. One by Europe, named after Giotto, the famous person who drew that painting. And before that, in 1 year before that, the International Cometary Explorer visited this comet called Giacobbe-Nizinger. This is the comet which we also observed prior to Halley, because we wanted to coordinate the observations. We wanted to check how it would work for Comet Halley, and so this was a trial kind of a comet. So they did the same thing for the space mission also. But it was at a very safe distance. It did not go close to the comet at all. And subsequently, in the year 2001, we had this mission called Deep Space, which went very close to Comet Borrelli, as close as 600 kilometers. I wanted to introduce an animation here. Well, you can get it. If you get Deep Space 1 and animation, it shows you the video of how the material is ejecting from the surface of the comet. From the those white regions there, they are all places from where the material is getting ejected. And subsequently, we had this comet mission called Stardust. It visited the comet Wilt 2, and it went as close as 300 kilometers. So they were able to make a map, and all these regions or these features here have been named after people who have contributed to the study of comets. Rahe, Jürgen Rahe, Huygens Shoemaker, all these people. They have contributed to the study of this. And you have the other one which visited Comet Temple in 2005, and there was an impact. It impact means it was something was thrown onto it, and then the other aircraft, the other mother bodies stayed away and observed what is the effect of the impact. This was in 2005 for the Comet Temple. And another deep impact comet, it visited Comet Hartley in 2010. Even this beautiful videos are available from these space missions. And so in all these cases, the idea was to find out the effect of the impact, and it was possible to explore this. And Rosetta was in news because it was sleeping for about 7 years, and they woke it up in 2014, and it reached this comet called Churyumov-Gerasimenko, a periodic comet, and it landed. It put a small Philae, that was called the lander, on it. But unfortunately, what happened was, this is the position. See, this is where it is. It slid. It went somewhere here and slid into the shadow region. So this is the shadow region that you are seeing. So it is sitting here in the shadow region. This photo was taken by the orbiter. So it was not functional because it is in the shadow region. No sunlight is reaching it, and therefore it is not activated at all. So that is one interesting observation of Rosetta. Well, that did not work, but the orbiter collected a lot of information. This orbiter went ahead and went to another comet also, the Hartley comet. So finally, we have from all these studies a very good understanding of the structure of the comet. That is, this is the head, which you can't see when it is near the perihelion because it is shrouded by the dense coma material. But the spacecrafts have shown that this is the thing that happens. This is the rate at which the material evaporates. It suddenly increases. So you have the dust tail and you have the plasma tail, both coming from the comet. And I mentioned you about the 2 types of storehouses. Both the hypothesis came in the year 1950, which is an important year. So in that year, Kuiper belt also was hypothesized for the short period comets. Wood cloud, as encompassing the entire solar system, was another thing that was hypothesized. And then this Whipple hypothesis of dirty snowballs. He called them as dirty snowballs. And the dirty part comes because the spectrum had shown that it contains so much of material other than ice. I mean, I showed you a list of organic molecules and metals and other things. So many things are there. So they named it as dirty snowball. And snowball, as it approaches the sun, the ice evaporates and creates all these colorful tails and other things. So now they have been able to pinpoint and correctly say that this is the process that is happening in the case of the comet, and looking at the material that is ejected as it approaches the perihelion point, you come up with another situation. What is that other situation? Okay, this is the structure which is explained again with the magnetic field incorporated. The magnetic field has been measured and it is low, but it creates some kind of a cavity. So this is called the magnetic cavity here. So how exactly this happens, this part is not yet understood. And therefore, the material that is coming from the solar wind creates a bow shock like this, and all the interactions start happening here after the cavity, and that is where they get separated into two types of tails. Now here is the tidal force. You all know what is a tidal force. This is the photograph of comet Linear taken approximately 15 days or 3 months apart. See, this is how it was in 29th October. And in 15th, see, this has broken into 2 pieces. Then it has broken into 3 pieces by December. And by January, they all have disintegrated into small pieces. So this is because of the tidal force. Because now you know that the comet is not a spherical body. It is like a potato or more like a groundnut, because the previous picture showed that. Therefore, what is the effect of the tide? When I use the word tide, immediately what comes to your mind is the moon. So here is the moon and this is the earth, let us say. Why are there tidal forces on the ocean? You know that the high tides occur in the ocean twice a day. That is because of the differential force. That is, consider this body, ocean on this side and the ocean on this side of the earth. This experiences slightly larger gravitational force by the moon as compared to this. So they have taken this as d is the distance to the moon, and so the distance here is d minus r, where is the r is the radius of the earth, and here it is d plus r. So the force experience will be gmm by d plus r squared, and here it is d minus r squared. And so there is a small difference in the force, and this is the tidal force. So this is responsible for pulling the water on both sides, not only on one side, on both sides. So this is explained in the case of the moon. So what happens in the case of the comet? So this force, now how do you break a groundnut? If you want to break the skin of the groundnut, you apply a torque or something like that, so that it breaks into two and you can access the seeds inside. The same thing happens to the comet. The force on either side of the body will be different. So that small differential force is sufficient for it to break. So this shows how fragile the structure is. So the tidal force now is able to explain, because even earlier people had known that the comets break into pieces. Comet West, which came in 1976, showed breaking up after the perihelion passage into 4 pieces, but all the 4 of them were still together and they moved away as a single entity. But in some cases, they can get separated fairly at a larger angle. The other example is this comet Shoemaker-Levy, which I showed as an example for D, the example of D type. And here, these are the 21 pieces that were photographed by the Hubble Space Telescope. So they were broken into 21 pieces. All the 21 pieces, as I mentioned earlier, were given A, B, C, D, etc. And the timing of these also were precisely known, and they were unfortunately it happened on the other side of Jupiter, so we couldn't see from the Earth. But after 5 hours, when Jupiter turned to our side, we were able to see the scars. So here are the scars. Now they were able to identify which particular scar is caused by which particular piece. Okay, so this was a very interesting thing. So that means comets are easily broken into pieces. That tells you something about the mass of the comet also. I had asked a question earlier, how is the mass of the comet determined? So in this case, you see that its mass is so small that it got easily perturbed into a different orbit by the gravitational force of Jupiter. Now these are the various, this is from Halley's comet. The amount of material that is ejected is enormous. Now see, look at the scale. It's a very small body, 5 kilometers. So you can compare it to with some isolated hill like the Nandi Hills or the Chamundi Hills, but not Western Ghats or Himalaya. But the weight, I think you can compare it with that of Himalayas, the mass. Okay, this is another comet of 19th century, which broke into two pieces, and the two pieces came. This had a period of 6 years. It's called Comet Biela, and they saw one comet coming, and next year, the next apparition, there were two pieces coming, one behind the other. It must have been a beautiful sky, and therefore somebody sketched it as a beautiful painting. And subsequently, the comets did not return. But at that time, they had a meteor shower. This is how they were able to relate the comets and the meteor shower. Now, I had asked about the escape velocity. Now, I told you approximately the mass is 10 to the power of 15 kg and the radius is 10 kilometers. You can calculate the escape velocity. You will realize that you don't have even to be PT Usha to run across the comet and escape. You can walk. I leave this calculation to you. So what does this mean? Now we come back to this picture which I had shown earlier. Now by virtue of the temperature, you know that the gas molecules are in constant motion. In fact, the temperature is defined by that. So even in this room, the molecules are all moving around by virtue of the temperature here. So by virtue of the temperature, these molecules or the gas particles on a comet will be in random motion. So that random motion is shown by the black thing here. But when it comes close to the sun, they are ejected. This velocity can be more than the escape velocity. That means what? That means the material which is escaping from the comet will not return. They are lost for the comet forever. The comet loses the material. So what happens to this material? So this is another interesting debate. And so the material gets distributed all along the orbit. So the material, although the comet has come and gone, the dust which is ejected is lagging behind it, and they are all scattered along the orbit. So when the Earth goes close to that, this shower occurs because all that material will fall onto the Earth. So that is the relation between the meteor shower and the periodicity. So here is the comet. So the dust particle is all over. So when the Earth comes close to this point, you will see that the observer is looking in this direction, and the dust is situated here. So all the dust particle is coming to the Earth from that direction. So that particular direction in the sky is identified by the name of the constellation. See, this is happening very close here only, but um, in the sky you have in the background a specific constellation. So this is another thing to show why you see them only at dawn. You will see the suppose the approach is happening at dawn at a specific hour when this observer is looking at the sky in this position. There may be another observer here, but he will not be in a favorable position to see the shower, but this person will be having a very good opportunity to see the shower, because just at dawn before this, so the material will the this fellow has the advantage of Earth's orbital motion also, so he will be in a favorable position to see the meteor shower. And we had an opportunity to see that in the year 1999, when many people here saw it in the early morning, because that was a heavy shower. It occurred for about several hours. So we were able to see that from Bangalore. I think people counted something like 100 meters per hour or so. So the direction from which it appears to come is called the radiant. So it appears as though it is coming from this direction. It will not be like this. This is an imaginary sketch. So if you are lying down on the terrace and watching the sky, you will see them in different directions. So you may see this particular one, and then you may see this particular one. You trace it back, then you will get the radiant. That is how the position of the radiant is calculated. And the one that comes in November is called Leonid, because it appears to come from a position in the constellation of Leo. And we have yet another one that was shown here. Here, see, the comet Halley produces two showers because the Earth meets the orbit once in October and again in May. So once it appears to come from Orion, another time from Aquarius, and therefore the shower is named after the constellations. This is called Orionid and this is Aquarid. Another comet, Swift-Tuttle, its orbit is such that the Earth goes that only once in a year, and therefore you will have it on August 12th. So that is called Perseid shower. So similarly, there are many meteor showers all through the year, and the dates are fixed because it is decided by the movement of the Earth. So if you take a time sequence photograph, it may appear something like this. This is exaggerated. So if you get something like 100 or 200 meteors per hour, then you will get this kind of a picture. Once upon a time, we used to have a radio. I say once upon a time because I do not know if the present generation people do know about the radio at all. Those days we were having what are called short wave transmission. There was no satellite to broadcast the programs, so we were able to hear BBC and Radio Moscow by this technique, where the radio waves were sent from the receiver and they would get reflected by the ionosphere, and we would get it in our transmitter radio. Our small handy radio home radios were able to receive this. Now everything comes from satellite, so this technique is forgotten. But in those days, during the meteor shower, a streak of meteor like this would instantaneously ionize this region, and therefore you would get reflection because of that also. So you would hear some noise here. This technique was used by several people to identify the meteor shower, even if it happens during the day. Because if it is during the day, you are not able to see it. But this technique would show you that. Using this technique, they were able to precisely determine the radiant also. So this is a technique that is forgotten, but now I still feel that there are ham radio people who have been given a slot wherein this kind of experiment can be constructed, and those of you who know ham radio operation can still monitor this during the day. You just have to leave the instrument on and it keeps recording whenever there's a streak. It will give a king, and so you can count and see how many meteors were recorded. So now coming to the location of the Kuiper belt and Oort cloud, and how you are going to use this to understand the formation of the solar system. Now you see the basic difference between the two sources is one is an envelope and the other is a disc-like thing, and they are well separated, and there is a small difference in the compounds also. The ones which are coming from the Oort cloud have random orientations of the orbits, whereas the ones which are coming from the Kuiper belt have carbon-rich compounds. Okay, and they have entered into some kind of a resonance, and therefore you can predict the periodicity also. So now we will relate this to the origin of the solar system. Okay, this is the same Oort cloud. This is not to scale. This is only to show the same point which I mentioned just now, that the Kuiper belt objects are all restricted to this plane, whereas the Oort cloud is extending in this shape. It is covering the entire solar system like an envelope. So this is just a point I thought you can think over. Suppose we discover a new comet on the orbit that brings it closer to the sun than Mercury every 125 years. So what will you conclude based on that? That it has been on its current orbit for only a very short time compared to the age of our solar system. It has a coma and tail, and during most of its orbit, each orbit. It came from the Oort cloud, it came from the Kuiper belt, or you can't apply any of this. So please think over based on what I have discussed just now. This should be an interesting point for you to ponder. Then I want to tell about the depth of the comet. So this is the depth of this comet Lovejoy. Now you can see that, I suppose you can see this, it is repeating. So this is the comet. It is entering the sun's coronal mass ejection. It survived this. So what are the different possibilities of the death of a comet? It survived, it did not die here. That is why I showed this first. Now let us choose comet NK. Comet NK, I told you, is a 3-year period comet. It looks like this now. Even with a very good telescope, it won't show you a very long tail, a very short tail, and a fuzzy patch. That's it. So you can conclude that it has been coming so many times to the towards the sun that it has lost all its material. So maybe it will become a dark charcoal-like thing and may continue forever like this. Now this is another Ikea-Seki. I chose this particular painting because it was a very bright comet. I told you it was almost 45 degrees in the sky. And you can see the street lights of the village there. That's why I chose this. And it was visible for a fairly long duration. And what did happen to it? It was a parabolic comet, so it returned from wherever it went. I do not know. So it may come back, it may not come back. And the fate of Lovejoy, since what I'm showing here is Lovejoy, it survived this kind of a passage, but the other one which came in 2013 called Ison did not survive. So people were expecting that it would show a very spectacular tale after the perihelion passage or before that. The whole thing sort of fused out. It was unrecognizable at all as it approached the sun. Every part of it was vaporizing. That was the death of that. And we know the unfortunate case of Shoemaker-Levy, which went and crashed onto Jupiter. And Jupiter digested it in 6 months, so it was gone. So we know that so many options are available for the comet to die, or it may not die like MK at all. So now the new species of interstellar comets, they may come and go. Similarly, the comets from our solar system may go to some other solar system and be visitors there. That is also possible. Alright, so I have told you about all these things. Then the basic question comes is, basic question is, why should we study the comets? That takes us to the origin of the solar system. So all of you know the theory of the formation of the solar system, namely that there was a huge mass of gas. Well, how was the theory formulated? The theory was formulated based on several observed facts, namely, I will give you one or two only. All the objects in the solar system are revolving in the same direction, and most of them are spinning in the same direction. And there is a distinct similarity in the inner solar system composition and the giant planets. So then there is a lot of gap between the planets. For example, the orbit of let's take Sun to Earth. In that small region, you have two planets, whereas between Earth and Mars, it is the same distance approximately, but there is no other planet. Now consider Sun to Jupiter. And beyond that, almost for a similar distance, there is no other comet, no other planet. So all these kinds of properties were put together into this formation of this origin of the solar system. So the rotation and the conservation of angular momentum are the two main things that have been incorporated into this. So there's a huge mass of rotating gas. It was rotating very slowly, and the central part of it became the sun, and those which did not participate in that, but they all settled on the disk, and on the disk individually the planets were formed. And the planets at the time of formation made use of all the material that was available in their vicinity, and therefore you will see these kind of gaps between the orbits of the planets. So this is roughly the theory. Now where will you put the comet from? Where will you put the comet in this scenario? So the comets are the remnant material in the outermost regions of the original solar nebula. Now all these planets have evolved in their own way in the last 3.5 billion years, and therefore they have evolved differently, and therefore we will not have an opportunity to know what was the original mass was, what did it contain, and what was the rotation period, or what was the chemical composition, etc. And that is preserved in these comets. So with asteroids also. So these comets, which have stayed far away from the central regions where a lot of activity was going on, have hidden all the information about the original nebula out of which the solar system was formed. So that is why the study of the comets become important. That way, the ones that come for the first time are more important than the periodic comets. The periodic comets have evolved because they have been coming on closer to the sun and going back, and they have been losing material and so on. Whereas the ones which are far away in the Oort cloud and those which are coming for the first time, they will have still that information hidden in their composition. That is why the study of the solar system and the study of the comets for understanding the solar system is very important. Then there is this situation on the water. Where did all the water come from? So the source of water is now believed to be the these comets itself. So it supplied so much of material. The animation that you are seeing is from Rosetta, where a raw photograph was used from the mission, and then they found that there is a snowflake kind of a phenomena happening on the surface. So that is what it is. So here it is. Here you have this is the raw image. This is they have removed all the noise, and then you can see these kinds of snowfall there. That means it has lot of water. The mission Hartley 2, mission to Hartley 2 revealed this. So they have normal water. Normal water, as I mentioned, has both ortho and para, and heavy water also. So it's a large storehouse of water. So it's possible that they have supplied water not only to Earth and to Europa, but to many other planets also. And the water eventually has been utilized by the individual bodies in their own way. That's why we need to study these comets. And this is another interesting thing called the Shiva hypothesis. I mentioned this right in the beginning that this is a very complicated diagram, but you don't worry about the details here. So this is the sun, this is the earth, and the earth is going around the sun in this, and this is the Milky Way. The sun is, all of you know, the sun is going around the center of the Milky Way, and the path it takes is not a plain path, but it is going up and down also. So it is going up and down like this. This is the periodic motion of about 60,000 years, 65 million years or something. So you have a periodicity of that, and that is when it sweeps through the Milky Way. And the Milky Way is a rich storehouse of dust and gas. Therefore, when the sun moves through that, the outer region which is enveloping the solar system will get perturbed, and that is when a lot of comets are pushed inwards towards the center of the sun. So they will start their journey to the sun and go back. So the because this is like a cosmic dance, they have named it as a Shiva hypothesis. There is no other reason for that because this is periodic. So they have been able to identify from the study of the various cometary and planetary bodies that the frequency of comets coming and hitting Earth or Mars in the past was much more than compared to now. So that must have been when the solar system itself was diving through the dusty path of the Milky Way. Now it has come to a plane, it will come to a region where it is not so dusty. So after some million years again it will move through because it is going up and down like this in the galactic plane. So for understanding this, for understanding why the comets move towards the, what triggers them to make their motion towards the center of the sun from their cool, relatively peaceful environment, all these things we need to understand. So I have tried to explain what are the comets and where are they. I have also told you how do they die, and I also have touched upon why we need to study them. All said and done, it's a beautiful sight in the sky. And if you have a camera, almost all of you have camera now. A picture like this can be in your collection. This was the comet, which the other one is the cluster. This is the cluster. Pleiades, Kritika. This is the cluster, which is a beautiful cluster. So the tile passed through the cluster. I know this is very far away and this is not so far away, but still, from our perspective, it was a beautiful sight. So, even if you are not interested in the physics or the chemistry of the comet, you must watch. So, never miss a chance to see them whenever they are in the sky, and keep a track of the comets. There are so many sites available which keep you posted. So, when you get an opportunity to go to a village side which is free of light pollution, and beautiful, clear, sparkling sky, you can spot a comet perhaps. And maybe you will be lucky to capture a picture like this also. Thank you for the patience. So I think I have conveyed whatever little I knew, and perhaps it has triggered some interest on comets for you. So thank you. Namaste.
Thank you. Any questions anybody have? They can ask the speaker directly by unmuting. Any questions, any comments, any suggestions, anything? Okay, so
I allowed lot of time. I allowed lot of time so that there can be lot of questions.
yeah.
Okay, good morning, ma'am.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Can I ask a simple question?
Yeah. Please.
Okay, so is there any useful till now the study of comets? Any useful things means any application the study of comets?
What kind of application?
Kind in our day-to-day life or any
No.
application?
See, this kind of study will not have any direct day-to-day application. No, because that way the entire subject of astrophysics will not have any day-to-day application. No.
এরা সহজ কোশ্চেন আপনি এখানে করে করে এনেকে গম পাবো no this type of
I can't make out what's the question.
No, this was somebody else. You can continue. This was somebody else. You can continue. It was a background noise.
I can't see. Has anybody written any question in the comments or something?
No questions are written. No questions are written there. I think Deepti Datta, did you get your answer?
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
The question was about whether there is a practical application in learning comets.
Yeah, I know that. You see, the thing is, they have planned so many space missions, and the space technology has a direct application to our daily lives. For example, to just give you one example, they designed these small cameras for the use in the space telescopes or space missions, and now that is sitting in your mobile phone, right? So why was that invented? So like this, there are indirect applications, but I cannot say it was because of the comet. No, I can't declare that. It has something to do with space technology in general. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Good morning, ma'am.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I am having a question that how we can determine in which direction the motion of the comet is.
Yeah, this is precisely the point which I wanted to explain. For that, I need to explain the coordinates. No, so another person will be covering the coordinates in the afternoon. He will explain. Therefore, you see something in the sky, and to transfer that onto a paper like this and to prepare a diagram like this, no, it's very, very difficult. So you have to understand a coordinate system very precisely. And the other complication is because the coordinate system is not fixed. I told you that if you want to fix this point, I need a x, a y, and a z in the classroom. Whereas in the sky, everything is moving. So your reference itself is moving. So in that moving reference, you will have to measure the coordinate system and then transfer them mathematically to a paper like this. So this is the process. So basically you have to understand the coordinate system. So that I think will be explained later in the afternoon.
Okay,
Madam.
thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Madam, can I ask you a question?
Please.
Okay, sir. Thank you for your good class and glorious presentation first. Sir, Madam told that the interstellar comet Oumuamua and the comet Schumacher-Levy both have cigar shape. Can we say both the same origin?
No. Wait a minute. When I said Shoemaker-Levy was in the shape of cigar, because it had broken into pieces. And so from this distance, they could not make out that they were individual pieces.
Yes.
So they started getting separated, and then they were able to make out that. You see, what happens is, suppose you have a body which is held like this. They're both moving like this. And then what happens? They break into pieces. When they break into pieces, there is another velocity that is added to this. So the velocity, there is a slight change in the velocity, because of which their movement will be different now. And that will show up after a few days when they get separated. So after several months of observation, they found that what was looking like a single piece, like a cigar, turned out to be 21 individual pieces.
Okay.
So that is the end of that. Whereas the other one is the structure of this itself. It did not show any this second body interstellar thing. It did not show any breaking up, but its shape itself was like that.
Okay.
I showed you the images of other comets. They were looking like potatoes.
Yeah.
But this was not in the shape of potato. It was like a long column. So that's where the difference is. But more importantly, it's the chemical composition that is difference between that made them declare that it is the comet from a different solar system.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, madam.
Anybody else? So if there is no other questions, I thank the speaker. I thank Dr. Shailaja for having taken her time and come here and given us a wonderful talk and a good insight and a good overview of the physics, chemistry of comet. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we will have just a 2-3 minutes break before we go for the next session. So whoever has not given the attendance, please go ahead and give it, because that is mandatory to record your attendance here. Those who have registered.